In the United States today, a black person is 5 times more likely to be stopped by police without just cause than a white person. 5 times. Not for speeding, not for a broken taillight, but for simply existing in their own skin. This is an anomaly. It's a statistical reality. On this channel, we operate from a core belief that every black American deserves the exact same opportunity and is entitled to the same regard as their white fellow citizens. It's a simple principle of fairness. So what happens when the very systems designed to protect us are, in fact, engineered to violate that principle? This isn't a fringe conspiracy theory. It's documented policy, written into law and executed on our streets every single day. This isn't about a few bad apples. It's about a machine that's been built over centuries, piece by piece, law by law, to turn bias into official procedure. This is an epidemic of racial profiling fueled, funded, and defended by the United States government itself. When we talk about racial profiling, the conversation often gets derailed by a simple, yet profoundly misleading argument. The few bad apples theory. The idea that the problem isn't the system, but a handful of individual officers with personal prejudices. But this deliberately and dangerously misses the point. To say racial profiling is just a few bad apples is like finding a city's water supply is contaminated and blaming a few leaky faucets. The problem isn't the faucet. It's the water treatment plant. The epidemic of racial profiling in America isn't just sustained by individual bigotry. It's sustained by policy, by training, and by law. It is institutional. So what does that truly mean? Imagine a house. Individual prejudice is a crack in a window pane, an ugly but isolated flaw. Institutional bias, however, is in the very wiring of the house. You can't see the wires hidden behind the walls, but they determine which rooms get light and which ones stay in darkness. The switches might look identical, but depending on how the house was wired, flicking one might flood a room with light, while another does nothing at all. This is a denial of equal opportunity built right into the architecture. Institutional racism is that hidden wiring. It's when the rules and procedures of an institution, even if they appear neutral on the surface, are constructed to produce racially disparate outcomes. Racial profiling is a textbook example. It is, by its very nature, illegal. It's a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the 14th Amendment's absolute guarantee of equal protection under the law. These amendments are supposed to be the bedrock of our freedom, ensuring that the government cannot intrude upon your life without a valid reason, and must treat every single person with equal regard. The Department of Justice itself has stated in no uncertain terms that racial profiling is patently illegal, profoundly ineffective, and that it alienates communities from law enforcement. And yet, it persists, thriving in plain sight. It persists because it has been woven into the fabric of American law enforcement through specific government-sanctioned strategies. Think of it like a factory. The sign on the front of the building doesn't say, "We mass-produce racial inequality." But if the machinery on the assembly line is designed to process certain materials differently, if the raw materials are sourced exclusively from specific locations known to have those materials, and if the quality control inspectors are trained to only look for flaws in one type of finished product, the end result will be consistently, predictably, and systematically biased. Our law enforcement apparatus, in many ways, has become that factory. The machinery is made up of aggressive policing strategies that encourage frequent, low-level stops. The raw materials are the centuries of stereotypes and historical biases that wrongly associate people of color with criminality. And the quality control is a legal system that has, time and again, weakened the constitutional protections that would otherwise jam the gears and stop the assembly line. This is why focusing only on individual officers is a masterful distraction. An officer operating within a stop-and-frisk framework isn't necessarily waking up in the morning fueled by personal hatred. They are following a directive. They are using a tool they were given by their superiors, a tool specifically designed to target certain neighborhoods and, by extension, the people who live in them. An ICE agent pulling someone over because they look like an unauthorized immigrant is acting on a standard that has been given a green light by the highest courts in the land. This is the cold, hard core of the problem. It's not just about what is in an officer's heart. It's about what is in their training manual, their departmental directives, and the legal precedents that shield them from accountability. The system itself doesn't just allow profiling to happen. It creates the conditions for it to thrive. It provides a justification, the tools, and the legal cover. It masterfully transforms a moral wrong and a constitutional violation into standard operating procedure. To truly understand how America fuels this epidemic, we have to stop talking about the apples and start inspecting the orchard, right down to the poisoned soil from which it grew. This isn't happening by accident. It's not a glitch in the matrix. The widespread, systemic nature of racial profiling is a direct result of a series of deliberate policy choices, legal interpretations, and enforcement priorities. To understand the epidemic, you have to dissect the machine that drives it piece by piece. Here are 6 of the most powerful engines fueling racial profiling in America. It was declared as a war on a substance, but in practice, it has been a relentless, decades-long war on people, specifically black and brown people. The war on drugs is perhaps the single most significant driver of racial disparities in the American criminal justice system. The data is not just clear, it is damning. Black and white Americans use and sell illicit drugs at remarkably similar rates. If policing were truly colorblind, a simple matter of enforcing the law is written, arrest rates would naturally reflect that reality. But they don't, not even close. African Americans constitute about 14% of the U.S. population and represent a similar percentage of its drug users. Yet, they account for 29% of all people arrested for drug offenses and a staggering 33% of those incarcerated for them. For marijuana possession, the disparity becomes even more stark and indefensible. One ACLU study found that black Americans were, on average, 3.6 times more likely than white Americans to be arrested for marijuana possession, despite comparable usage rates. How is this even possible? It's not because police officers possess some magical ability to find more black drug users. It's because they are looking for them. It's a choice. The entire strategy of the drug war has been architected around aggressive, militarized, street-level enforcement in urban, predominantly minority neighborhoods. Think of it like this. Imagine 2 people are fishing in violation of a local ordinance. One is in a private, secluded pond on a country club estate. The other is at a crowded, public pier in the middle of the city. If you dispatch all of your game wardens to relentlessly patrol the public pier and never even glance at the country club, who are you going to arrest? The policy of where you look dictates who you find. Police departments, often incentivized by federal grants that reward high numbers of arrests, have flooded these communities with officers, conducting massive sweeps and using the most minor infractions as pretext to stop, question, and search for drugs. This isn't a failure of policing. It is a logical, calculated outcome of a strategy that targets places instead of actions, and by targeting places, it inherently targets the people who live there. The result is a devastating, self-perpetuating cycle that grinds communities into dust. A young man of color is stopped and arrested for possessing an amount of drugs that might be completely ignored on a college campus or at a music festival. He now has a criminal record, a permanent stain that makes it exponentially harder to get a job, secure housing, or even apply for a student loan to better his life. His opportunities vanish. His community is further destabilized by the constant presence of aggressive policing and the loss of its members to the prison system. The police presence intensifies in response to the crime they themselves are creating through mass arrests, and the cycle begins anew. The war on drugs provided the perfect, race-neutral on-paper justification for the hyper-surveillance and over-policing of communities of color. It gave law enforcement a public-facing pretext to stop, search, and arrest on a massive scale, creating millions of criminal records and feeding a system of mass incarceration that is disproportionately black and brown. It was never just about drugs. It was about who our society allows to get away with using them and who it condemns. The theory was simple, academic, and dangerously seductive. To prevent serious crime, you must first crack down on all forms of minor disorder. A single broken window, if left unrepaired, sends a signal that no one is in control, that no one cares. This invites more broken windows, then graffiti, then loitering, and eventually more serious and violent crime. This theory, known as broken windows, became the intellectual foundation for one of the most controversial and racially biased policing strategies in modern history: stop, question, and frisk. pioneered and perfected in New York City. The idea was to empower officers to be proactive. They were encouraged and, in many cases, pressured by departmental quotas to stop individuals on the street based on a reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, question them, and frisk them for weapons or contraband. On the surface, it was marketed as smart, preventative policing. In practice, it became a massive, unconstitutional dragnet that overwhelmingly targeted Black and Latino men for the simple act of walking down their own streets. At its peak, the NYPD was conducting hundreds of thousands of stops every single year. In 2011 alone, there were over 685,000 documented stops. Nearly 90% of those stopped, humiliated, and searched in public were Black or Latino. And what did these hundreds of thousands of invasive public stops yield? Almost nothing. In the overwhelming majority of frisks, no weapon was found. Rigorous research by criminologists later found that the stratospheric number of stops had a statistically negligible impact on reducing crime. Stop and frisk was a perfect legal mechanism for industrial-scale racial profiling. The legal standard, reasonable suspicion, is a notoriously vague and subjective term. It's a legal ghost impossible to pin down. It could mean anything from furtive movements or changing direction to wearing clothes commonly used in a crime or simply being in a high-crime area, a designation disproportionately and arbitrarily applied to minority neighborhoods. This flimsy standard gave officers a legal blank check to act on their implicit biases, stopping people not for what they did, but for who they were and where they happened to be. It was a strategy that treated every young person of color as a potential criminal until proven otherwise. A federal judge ultimately ruled the NYPD's rampant use of stop and frisk unconstitutional, finding that it was in fact a form of indirect racial profiling. But the damage was already done. The policy had systematically destroyed trust between the police and the communities they were supposed to serve. It taught an entire generation of young men of color that they were viewed as perpetual suspects in their own neighborhoods. Studies have found a direct and painful link between the high rates of aggressive policing during these years and a higher burden of anxiety, depression, and school disengagement among young people in those neighborhoods. Though the massive scale of stop and frisk in New York was eventually curtailed, the broken windows philosophy and its proactive policing tactics live on in departments across the country. It continues to justify the over-policing of the most minor offenses: jaywalking, loitering, riding a bike on the sidewalk, playing music too loudly, which are then used as pretext for stops, for searches, and for arrests that disproportionately target people of color. It's a strategy that manufactures police encounters out of thin air and ensures that certain communities will always, by design, have more of them. In the wake of the horrific September 11 attacks, a tidal wave of fear and grief swept across America. In the name of national security, the nation's legal and security apparatus was fundamentally re-engineered. And in that process, racial and religious profiling was not just tolerated or excused. It was explicitly institutionalized as a matter of national policy. The government itself declared that some people were more suspicious than others simply because of where they came from or how they prayed. Almost overnight, being perceived as Muslim, Arab, Middle Eastern, or South Asian made you a suspect. The federal government implemented a program called the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System, or NSEERS. It was a system of racial and religious registration, plain and simple. It required men from 25 specific countries, all but one of them Arab or Muslim-majority nations, to be fingerprinted, photographed, and subjected to special, intensive interrogations upon entering the U.S. Over 80,000 men dutifully registered with their government. As a direct result, more than 13,000 of them were placed in deportation proceedings. The number of people charged with a terrorism-related crime as a result of this massive program? 0. Not a single one. This was profiling on an industrial scale, written into the pages of the Federal Register. But it didn't stop there. The FBI and local law enforcement agencies began mapping and surveilling entire communities. Mosques were infiltrated by paid informants. Muslim student groups were monitored, and innocent business owners were questioned about their patrons and their private lives. The government's actions sent a clear and chilling message. Your faith and your national origin are, in and of themselves, grounds for suspicion. It was as if the nation's immune system, in its panic to fight a foreign threat, had begun to attack the body's own healthy cells. This fusion of national security with local law enforcement created a new and powerful engine for profiling. Federal counterterrorism task forces were created, and local police departments were deputized to assist in these efforts, often with little training or oversight. This blurred the lines between investigating actual criminal leads and simply monitoring entire ethnic or religious populations. The very definition of suspicious activity became tainted with bias. Speaking a certain language, donating to a particular charity in your home country, or simply gathering to worship could be interpreted as a potential threat indicator. This created a climate of intense, suffocating fear and alienation. People became afraid to practice their religion openly or to engage in community life, worried that their presence would attract unwanted government attention. Trust in law enforcement, already fragile in many communities, was shattered. How can you report a crime to the very same agency you believe is watching you not because of anything you've done, but because of who you are? The Post-9/11 security state provides a chilling and vital example of how easily constitutional protections can be swept away in the name of safety. It demonstrated that when the government officially sanctions profiling against one group, it normalizes a practice and makes it politically and legally easier to justify against others. It created a legal and political framework where targeting people based on group identity, rather than individual behavior, was seen not as a violation of American values, but as a legitimate and even necessary tool of the state. For decades, there was a general, if imperfect, understanding. Local police handle local crime, and federal agents handle federal immigration law. This separation was crucial. It was a firewall. It meant that immigrants, regardless of their status, could report crimes, serve as essential witnesses, and call 911 in an emergency without the paralyzing fear that the officers showing up at their door will be more interested in their papers than in their safety. But over the past 20 years, that firewall has been systematically demolished. Programs like 287G and Secure Communities have created formal partnerships between federal immigration authorities like ICE and local law enforcement agencies across the country. These programs effectively deputize local police and sheriffs to act as de facto ICE agents, giving them the authority to investigate a person's immigration status and initiate deportation proceedings. What this does in practice is turn a routine traffic stop for a broken taillight into a potential gateway to family separation and deportation. The officer who pulls you over for speeding now has the power to unravel your entire life. This has had a devastating and predictable effect, particularly on Latino communities. When local police are tasked with enforcing federal immigration law, the temptation to rely on crude racial and ethnic stereotypes becomes overwhelming. Who looks like an undocumented immigrant? The answer, in the eyes of many officers and in the text of many laws, is someone who looks Latino. Infamous state laws like Arizona's SB 1070, the so-called Show Me Your Papers law, explicitly required police to demand proof of citizenship from anyone they had reasonable suspicion of being in the country illegally, effectively codifying this form of profiling into state statute. The result is a landscape of pervasive fear. People are pulled over for the most minor traffic violations, or sometimes for no reason at all, and then aggressively questioned about their citizenship. Communities are subjected to sweeps, raids, and random checkpoints. The fear becomes all-encompassing. A comprehensive study by the ACLU found that these partnerships dangerously hurt public safety because immigrant communities become terrified of interacting with police in any capacity. Domestic violence goes unreported. Robberies go unsolved because witnesses are too afraid to come forward. The firewall is gone and the entire community feels the blaze. This practice has been given a measure of legal cover for decades. In the 1975 Supreme Court case United States v. Brignoni-Ponce, the court made a fateful ruling. It stated that while an officer can't stop a car solely because its occupants appear to be of Mexican ancestry, that very ancestry can be used as a relevant factor in the decision-making process for a stop near the border. This decision cracked open a legal door for race and ethnicity to become part of the official calculus for law enforcement. As civil rights advocates and even dissenting Supreme Court justices have argued for years, this logic creates a two-tiered system of justice, a constitution-free zone, where the rights of some are diminished because of how they look. By merging local policing with federal immigration enforcement, the government has created a powerful incentive for racial profiling and has sown deep and lasting fear in the very communities that need protection the most. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution is supposed to be our shield. It is the guardian at the gate of our personal liberty, protecting us from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. It's the legal barrier that prevents the police from stopping you on a whim, searching your car without cause, or demanding to see your papers without proper justification. But over the last several decades, a series of Supreme Court decisions have systematically chipped away at this shield, creating legal loopholes and backdoors that have made racial profiling not only possible, but much easier to get away with. Imagine the Fourth Amendment as a strong, solid oak door protecting your home. One of the most significant cases, a 1996 decision called Wren v. United States, effectively handed police a master key. In that case, the Supreme Court ruled that as long as an officer observes any minor traffic violation, no matter how trivial or common, they can legally pull a car over, even if their real reason for the stop is a suspicion based entirely on the driver's race. This is what's known as a pretextual stop. The traffic violation is just a pretext, the excuse. The real motive is to go on a fishing expedition for other, unrelated crimes. Think about what this means in practice. The traffic code is a labyrinth of hundreds of obscure rules. Driving 1 mile per hour over the speed limit, failing to signal a full 100 feet before a turn, having a tiny air freshener hanging from your rear view mirror, having a small crack in your windshield. It is nearly impossible to operate a motor vehicle for any length of time without committing some minor, technical infraction. The Wren decision effectively gave police the legal power to stop almost any driver at any time, as long as they can find a plausible after-the-fact excuse. And who do they overwhelmingly choose to use this immense power on? The data is undeniable: Black and Latino drivers. This single decision single-handedly opened the floodgates for racially biased traffic stops across the entire nation. The legal groundwork for many of these stops was laid even earlier. The 1968 case Terry v. Ohio established a standard of reasonable suspicion for police to stop and frisk someone on the street. While the court intended this to be a narrow tool for officer safety in situations involving suspected violent crime, this vague, subjective standard has since been stretched to its breaking point. It's been used to justify millions of stops based on criteria so flimsy, like furtive movements or being a high-crime area, that they allow an officer's implicit bias to flourish and dictate their actions. By creating the pretextual stop doctrine in Wren and allowing the dangerously subjective standard of reasonable suspicion from Terry to justify millions of stops, the Supreme Court has provided the legal architecture for racial profiling to thrive. It has, in effect, handed law enforcement a playbook for how to engage in biased policing while staying within the technical, procedural bounds of the law. The court has systematically weakened our constitutional shield, leaving entire communities of color exposed and vulnerable to the whims and biases of law enforcement. For years, when communities of color raised the alarm about being systematically targeted by police, the official response was often a dismissive denial paired with demand for proof. "Show us the data," they said. So activists, civil rights lawyers, and legislators fought for data collection. The idea was simple and powerful. If every police department is required to record the race and ethnicity of every person they stop, we can finally get an objective, undeniable look at whether profiling is really happening. Hundreds of law enforcement agencies across the country now collect this data, and the results are not ambiguous. What the data shows is a clear, consistent, and undeniable pattern of systemic bias. In California, Black residents make up about 6% of the population, but account for 16% of all police stops. Across the nation, study after study consistently shows that Black and Latino drivers are stopped and searched at significantly higher rates than white drivers. But here is the statistical smoking gun. Searches of white drivers are often more likely to turn up illegal contraband like drugs or weapons. Think about what that means. It means police are stopping and searching people of color more often, with less evidence, and are finding illegal items less frequently. This isn't just a coincidence. This is the statistical signature of racial profiling. It proves that the bar for suspicion is lower for people of color. The data is no longer in question. The proof is there in black and white, in endless rows and columns of official statistics. But the victory of data collection has led to a new, more insidious problem: calculated inaction. We have collected mountains of irrefutable evidence demonstrating systemic bias, but there's a profound and shocking lack of political will to do anything meaningful about it. This is the data deception. We were told to prove the problem exists, and now that we have, the system simply shrugs. Legislation like the End Racial and Religious Profiling Act, ERRPA, which will create a federal ban on profiling and mandate data collection and training nationwide, has been introduced in Congress multiple times over 2 decades. It has consistently failed to pass. It gets introduced with fanfare. It gets debated in subcommittees, and then it dies a quiet death, a victim of political gridlock and a manufactured lack of urgency. Even when policies are put in place, they are often designed to be toothless. The Department of Justice has issued official guidance prohibiting federal law enforcement from engaging in profiling. However, this guidance has been widely criticized by civil rights groups for leaving massive loopholes, especially for national security and immigration enforcement, the very areas where profiling is most rampant and officially sanctioned. There is no strong, independent mechanism to enforce these rules, and accountability for violations is minimal to non-existent. It's like a doctor who orders a battery of expensive tests, confirms a serious diagnosis, and then files the results in a cabinet to gather dust while the patient gets sicker and sicker. The data collection, which was meant to be a tool for accountability, has been twisted into a hollow bureaucratic exercise. It allows the machinery of profiling to churn on, now with the full and documented knowledge of the government that is allowing it to happen. The numbers are staggering. The legal arguments are complex. But behind every single statistic, every court case, and every policy memo are human beings whose lives are profoundly and often permanently altered by this epidemic. Racial profiling isn't an abstract injustice debated in law schools and Capitol buildings. It's a daily, lived reality of fear, humiliation, trauma, and violence. It's the story of the black father, an accountant or a teacher or a mechanic, teaching his teenage son not just how to parallel park and merge onto a highway, but how to survive a routine traffic stop. This conversation, known in millions of American families as a talk, is a traumatic rite of passage. It is a lesson in preemptive surrender, how to keep your hands visible on the steering wheel at all times, how to announce every move you make, how to speak only when spoken to, using sir and ma'am regardless of how you are being treated, how to swallow your dignity, your pride, and your anger in the desperate hope that you might make it home alive. This is the antithesis of equal regard. It is a burden that white parents do not have to bear. It's the story of the Muslim woman, an engineer or a doctor, who feels a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach every time she approaches an airport security line. She knows that her hijab, a symbol of her faith and identity, might subject her to random extra screening, invasive questions about her beliefs, and the suspicious, hostile stares of fellow travelers and security agents. It's the constant, exhausting feeling of being othered, of being perceived as a potential threat in the very country you call home. It's the story of the Latino construction worker, a U.S. citizen born and raised in a city, who is repeatedly stopped and questioned by law enforcement near his job site, simply because he fits the profile. It's a recurring terror of being surrounded, thrown in the back of a van, and forced to prove your own citizenship on a street corner, a deep and lasting humiliation rooted entirely in the color of your skin and the language you might speak with your coworkers. This constant state of suspicion takes a devastating and cumulative psychological toll. It creates chronic stress, pervasive anxiety, and a debilitating feeling of powerlessness. Imagine living with an alarm that could go off at any moment for no reason, putting you in mortal danger. That is the psychological state profiling enforces. Research has conclusively shown that young people who are frequently stopped and harassed by police experience significantly higher rates of depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other serious mental health issues. It damages a person's sense of self-worth and corrodes their belief in the possibility of a just society. And sometimes the cost isn't just psychological, it is fatal. Racial profiling is the entry point, the first domino to fall for many of the police encounters that end in tragedy. A stop for an alleged minor traffic violation like a broken taillight, or for suspicious behavior like walking in a certain neighborhood, escalates. Fear and mistrust on both sides of the interaction create a volatile, explosive situation, and it is overwhelmingly black, brown, and indigenous people who pay the ultimate price. Black Americans are more than twice as likely to be killed by police as white Americans. Police violence is not a random phenomenon. It is a direct and predictable outcome of a system that initiates more aggressive and frequent contact with certain communities over others. This is the true, unquantifiable cost of racial profiling. It is the erosion of trust, the destruction of community, and the loss of life. It transforms the fundamental relationship between the citizen and the state from one of protection to one of predation. It forces millions of Americans to live with a constant low-grade fear, reminding them every single day that in the eyes of the law, their rights are conditional and their very humanity is suspect. It is a tax on their existence, paid in dignity, peace of mind, and all too often in blood. Exposing the machinery of racial profiling is not enough. The crucial question is, how do we dismantle it? There are no simple fixes or magic wands. This is a system built over generations, codified in law, and embedded in institutional culture. Tearing it down requires a radical reimagining of public safety, one grounded in accountability, transparency, and a fundamental commitment to achieving equal opportunity and regard for all. First, we must change the very laws that enable profiling. This starts with finally passing the End Racial and Religious Profiling Act, the RRPA, at the federal level. This isn't just another bill. It's a foundational step. It would establish a clear, enforceable nationwide ban on profiling by all local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. It would mandate meaningful data collection from every police department and, crucially, create real consequences for departments that exhibit persistent patterns of bias. It would also condition federal funding for police departments on their adoption of strong anti-profiling policies, using the government's immense financial leverage to force change from the top down. Second, we must fundamentally alter the strategies of policing. The era of broken windows and pretextual stops must end. It's failed. We need to move away from a model of policing that values high numbers of arrests for minor infractions and instead focus resources on investigating serious, violent crime. This means ending traffic stops for trivial violations, like having an air freshener or a cracked taillight, that are used as a backdoor for discriminatory searches. It means investing heavily in community-based violence interruption programs, which have proven effective at reducing crime, without the devastating social costs of aggressive, occupying police forces. And it means rebuilding the firewall, separating the duties of local law enforcement from federal immigration enforcement. Local police must be a source of trust for all residents, and that is simply impossible when they are also functioning as a deportation force. Third, accountability must be real, swift, and unavoidable. The legal doctrines that shield officers and departments from the consequences of their actions, like qualified immunity, need to be reformed or eliminated. Qualified immunity acts like a nearly impenetrable legal shield that protects government officials from being sued for violating constitutional rights, a shield no ordinary citizen has. We need robust, independent civilian oversight boards in every community with the power not just to review, but to investigate misconduct and recommend meaningful discipline. The Department of Justice must be empowered and, more importantly, willing to use its authority to investigate police departments with patterns of civil rights violations and to enforce consent decrees that mandate top-to-bottom systemic reform. Fourth, we must demilitarize the police and reinvest in our communities. For far too long, we have responded to deep-seated social problems like poverty, mental illness, homelessness, and addiction with handcuffs and jail cells. It's like using a hammer to perform surgery. Federal programs that transfer surplus military equipment, grenade launchers, armored vehicles, bayonets, to local police departments should be ended immediately. Those billions of dollars should be redirected into things that actually create safety, affordable housing, quality education, accessible mental health care, and real economic opportunity. When communities have the resources they need to thrive, crime rates fall. We cannot police our way out of problems that are fundamentally rooted in decades of disinvestment and inequality. Finally, and most importantly, this change must be driven by all of us. It requires sustained, unyielding public pressure on elected officials at every level, from city councils and mayors to members of Congress and the White House. It means showing up to city budget meetings to demand priorities that reflect a new, more humane vision of public safety. It means supporting the grassroots organizations that are on the front lines, fighting for justice in courtrooms and state houses. It means refusing to accept the toxic premise that the constant harassment and endangerment of our fellow citizens is an acceptable price to pay for law and order. This is not an anti-police agenda. It is a pro-democracy agenda. It is about demanding that our system of justice finally lives up to its own sacred ideals. The machine of racial profiling can be dismantled, but it will not happen on its own. It will require courage, persistence, and a collective demand for a nation where safety is not a privilege for some, but a fundamental right for all. The system we described wasn't built in a day, and it won't be dismantled overnight. But the first step is always to bring these truths into the light and have the difficult, necessary conversations. If this investigation has opened your eyes, or if it reflects a reality you know all too well, please share this video. The more people who understand how the system truly works, the harder it will be for those in power to ignore it. And we want to hear from you. The comments section is a place for this community to share its stories, its perspectives, and its ideas for change. Have you, or someone you know, been a victim of profiling? What does a just and equitable system of public safety look like to you? Drop your thoughts below. Your voice is a vital part of this movement. And finally, if you believe in this kind of in-depth, fact-based investigation, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We are committed to exposing the systems that perpetuate injustice and exploring solutions that can build a better future. We began with a question. What if the systems designed to protect us are engineered to target us? Throughout this investigation, we have seen that for millions of Americans, this is not a hypothetical. It is a calculated, documented result of specific government policies, policing strategies, and legal precedents. We've seen how the war on drugs provided a race-neutral cover for the hyper-policing of black communities. We've seen how broken windows theory gave birth to stop and frisk, a strategy that subjected millions to humiliating searches with virtually no public safety benefit. We've seen how post-9/11 security measures and immigration enforcement policies explicitly deputize law enforcement to profile people based on their religion, their ethnicity, and the language they speak. And we've seen how the Supreme Court has methodically weakened our constitutional defenses against these very practices, leaving the door wide open for bias to become procedure. This is the machinery of the epidemic. It is complex, it is deeply entrenched, and it is defended by powerful interests. But it is not unbreakable. The problem of racial profiling is not a flaw in the American character. It is a flaw in American policy. And because it was built by policy, it can be dismantled by policy. It is a choice. We can choose to continue down this path, to accept a two-tiered system of justice. Or we can choose to do the hard, necessary work of building a nation where equal protection under the law finally includes the equal opportunity and equal regard that black Americans have always deserved but have been systematically denied. The path forward is not about finding better individuals to operate a broken machine. It's about having the courage to admit the machine itself is the problem and finding the collective will to build a new one together. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching till the end. If this story opened your eyes, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss the truth they don't want you to hear. Together, we're building a powerful community. See you in the next video.